Hello, welcome back to another episode of This Round is on Me. You've probably heard of hacking computers, hacking smartphones, and hacking email. You've even heard of hacking elections. But what about hacking your body? The concept is called biohacking. And while it may sound like something out of a science fiction movie, it's really all about self-improvement. And there are numerous ways to incorporate methods of biohacking your body and mind into our daily routine. So joining me today to take us into the intriguing world of biohacking is Dr. Marcus Ranney, who is a business professional in healthcare and technology. His expeditions have led him to climb the sides of Everest, ski in the Arctic and the European Alps, and serve as a medical officer in the Royal Air Force and at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. He recently authored a book called At the Human Edge, which looks at human physiology and extreme sports, and is also on the verge of launching a cutting-edge digital platform by the same name. Join us after a quick break. Hey, Marcus, welcome to the show. So great to have you here.
Thank you. I've been excited about this since we spoke about it.
I know. And as I said earlier, I think the first time we met was at a UCL alumni event.
Indeed.
And after that, obviously, our paths haven't really crossed on work-related stuff, but you do come to the cafe and restaurant often. So
once a week.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you here in a completely different sort of role now. I want to know, we've been talking about this biohacking, and that's, I think, what intrigued me the most when, we talked about doing this episode. So what on earth is biohacking? Please break it down for someone completely ignorant like me, and tell us what this means. It sounds very scary.
Sure thing. And let me start by saying that, and I've told you this before, right, that as a family, so many of our happiest memories have been in your restaurants and eating your
Thank
food.
you.
So I'm really excited to do this conversation. So thank you for having me on the show. So look, biohacking, if I can simply put it, is that like any other piece of technology, our machine, our biological machine, which is our body, has a software, which is just continuously running. It's a physiology-based software. And as we would want to optimize any form of technology, we can optimize our technology by hacking it, which is where this ideology around biohacking comes in. Now, it's been made popular in recent times through people talking about various supplements and different forms of exercise and different medications, et cetera, et cetera. But as a physician, this might sound ironic, but I believe the best biohacks are lifestyle interventions, which are where you focus on the real simple things, which are the 5 pillars: sleep, fuel, movement, the environment, and your emotions. And if you can provide people with levers to manipulate those 5 pillars, then their probability of living a healthy, long life is really, really high, which is precisely what we want to achieve. So that's the idea.
I'm guessing also productivity, right?
Absolutely. Performance, productivity, you set your biological intent and you hack the software to get you there faster and in a more efficient manner.
Yeah, so let's get right to it.
Yeah.
How do we do this? I mean, honestly, I sort of come at this from many different avatars. So one is just personally, being more health conscious, and that's a very sort of broad term. But, and that health doesn't just mean what you eat, but, your mental health, everything, how you feel. I also want to sort of talk about it from the perspective of business owner leading sort of with a large team and being able to sort of maybe incorporate something like this and awareness about this into the culture of the organization, you know, because especially in the business that we're in, which is, restaurants and F&B, it's like a 24/7 job, and it's physically quite intense, even though it may not seem that way. People are on their feet, long hours and things. So that would be interesting. And then finally, as a mom, you sort of think like by feeding your child as less junk food as possible and sending them down to play is kind of doing the trick. But, I'd love to know if there's something sort of more mindful and meaningful that can be incorporated. So let's start about it. Let's tell us how, what kind of sort of lifestyle modifications or improvements we can be doing for ourselves.
All right. That's a lot of questions in one question there. It's nice you're starting easy for me. Look, we're assets, right? So each of us wants to extend the performance and the longevity of that asset, i.e. the human body. And quite often you'll hear me talk about this idea of a health span, which is not just the number of years you live, but basically how many healthy years do you have in that? How far out can you push disease before we fall unwell? Which is the goal for all of us, right? We all want to be healthy for as long as possible and enjoy life, whether it's at work, at home, or at play. All the things you just described. Now, as a physician, I'm a big believer of you can't treat what you can't measure, right? And we're living in a world where devices and information and data is just so prevalent. You and I, we create something in the region of 2 megabytes of data a second, right? Most of that, if not all of it, is actually being used to tell us or sell us things that we shouldn't buy, programs that we shouldn't watch, people that we shouldn't date, etc., etc. And a very, very small percentage of it all is actually being used to augment the human health experience, which is precisely what the journey that I'm going down. So how do we use that information? How do we use that data, which we're each creating to augment that experience, that health experience for ourselves, right? But keeping it really simple and keeping it really basic. So when I spoke about the 5 pillars previously, and we can deep dive into each and every one as we progress, right? We always start with sleep because 70% of performance is based on your recovery, your body's ability to recover. I'm training for my first half Ironman. I've been running full marathons for a long time, but this is the first time I'm taking it to the next level. And what I'm seeing, even in this very intense, packed training schedule, I'm only 9 weeks out from the event. Like you, entrepreneur, I've got 2 young kids at home, busy lifestyle, etc. The biggest facet that I can add to my training regime is ensuring that my body's recovery is optimized. And there are many, many different hacks, and we can talk about those, right? So that's the first big area. A person studying their sleep and their recovery and seeing what she or he can do in that environment to optimize it for a better outcome. The second then moves on to how you fuel. And this is where all the work you do come in, right? How do you fuel that body to
Don't throw shade on everything I do now.
No, I think, it's a very, very important piece, right? Because just as you have a car or any vehicle and the fuel you put in will obviously dictate how long it runs, in the same way, we should treat our body with that same degree of thought process. Mindfully eat, consume healthy, and ensure that the palate, etc., is being well satiated, which is where the great meals you cook come in, of course. Then there's movement and exercise. People often think about exercise as just running or going to the gym, but truthfully, there are 5 forms of movement. There's aerobic exercise like running, cycling, swimming, etc. There's anaerobic forms of exercise, which is high-intensity interval training, Tabata, certain sports like tennis, squash. There is strength training, there is balance, and then finally there's flexibility. And all of these are important, particularly the last 3 that I mentioned, which is around strength training, balance, and flexibility. Very, very important for the latter years of our life, right? We lose an incredible amount of muscle the older we get, and the ability of the body to then put that back on gets harder and harder, right? So it's very important in our 30s and 40s, we really invest in resistance training to bulk up as much muscle as we can so that that rate of decline reduces as we get older. Then we look at the environment because each of us is not an organism in isolation. Environment is not just the physical environment, the place you spend the time in the office, your home, at play, but the people you spend your time with as well, right? Who are the people that you surround yourself with in terms of people that give you energy and people, because we all have them, people that take energy from us. And it's a healthy balance that we need to achieve between both of those. If we got young kids, then we need to ensure that we're surrounding ourselves with the right environment for them that's inculcating a sense of nurturing growth mentally, physically, emotionally, etc. And then the last is that piece of emotion, right? Behavior change, mood, emotion, because we think we're logical beings, but we're anything far from it. 90% of the decisions we make are subconscious, driven on, as I said, that psychological code that we have. And a very, very little amount is actually penetrating through to our higher cerebral executive functions that they require a degree of decision making. So the background code is really important and how we set it and what we can do to manipulate that as we age. Because this saying that we heard and learned in school, which is a leopard can't change its spots, so you can't teach an old dog new tricks, completely wrong. The ability of any of us to create a new habit is as easy as snapping our fingers. We just need to know how and apply the right context around it for it to become ingrained as second nature. So all of this is more and more in our control than we possibly think of. And the idea that we do with biohacking is prescribing, and people who are watching the video will see me do air quotes at the same time, prescribing those lifestyle modifications at the right time for the right person in the right context. In the same way that I might prescribe metformin if you had, pre-diabetes or suffering from diabetes, and it would tell you what the dosage is, when you should take it, what you should be averse around. It's the same with a biohack. What is the biohack? When should you do it? For how long should you do it? What you need to be aware of around it. And then you lead to those changes that you want to see in your life. So that's sort of the background framework for this. Yeah.
So obviously the next question is, how and what are these biohacks in these sort of 5 pillars? And is this where I believe you're developing an app? So is this what that's meant to kind of facilitate for someone to, create something customized to them and for what they need?
Yeah, precisely. So I fell out of the love for clinical practice, or rather practicing medicine, about 12, 14 years ago, because medicine as a paradigm is sick care focused, right? We call it healthcare practice, but it's really focused on disease, the treatment of disease and the mitigation of that. Very, very important role to play in society. But I think that as a species, we have moved on from just treating disease. We have moved on from prevention of disease. And I think we're entering a paradigm where we're looking at optimizing, right? So focusing on being the best version of ourselves. And this is where devices and data have such a big role to play. So in order for this intelligence to reach as many people as possible, this idea of democratization of health span, this is precisely what the work I'm doing with Human Edge is focused on. So creating a mechanism that each of us is empowered through digital technology to understand what their biology is telling them, and then to use this methodology to be the best version of themselves. I gave a TED talk about 5 years ago now, and it's really interesting looking back at that talk today to see where we are today versus what I was envisaging. And it's incredible how the world has changed to allow us to do that with technology, wearable devices, et cetera, et cetera. But let's jump into the science, right? People want to know how, not just what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's look at recovery. Should we start with sleep, right? Some really, really simple things for people who are listening in to do. So the first thing is look at your sleep as a routine. All of us get obsessed with 7 hours of sleep on the pillow, right? We forget that sleep is a journey of 3 equal parts. That's right. I said it, 3 equal parts, right? What do you do for that 120 minutes before you put your head on the pillow? The 7 hours or 8 hours when your head is on the pillow. And then what you do for that 20 to 30 minutes after you get your head off the pillow. So each of those 3 aspects are really important for you to feel well rested and energetic the next day. So as you think about your bedtime routine, winding down, let's say the ideal situation is you're aiming to fall asleep by 11 p.m. So you really want to be entering into the bedroom environment by about 10:15, right? So what should that bedroom environment look, feel, sound, and be like, right? So temperature, right? The body's restorative capacity is optimized when you are immersed in a temperature band between 16 to 18 degrees Celsius, right? So people like you and I living in temperate zones, warm countries around the world, air conditioning has a really powerful effect when it comes to optimizing your recovery. Now, there are people who complain of sinusitis and challenges with breathing. And of course, then it needs to be looked at separately. But for those who can tolerate it, and if your partner or spouse can tolerate it, because that's often, and I don't have a biohack for that, by the way, but if your partner and spouse can tolerate it, then optimizing the temperature of your room to 16 to 18 degrees is really critical. Having a very, very dark environment. So investing in good quality blackout blinds, curtains to make sure that the light levels are pretty much near zero. Ensuring that there are no LEDs in the bedroom. So this is a game that we play every time we spend a night in a hotel room, is finding all those damn little red LEDs, figuring out which bulb, which switch does what, and then covering them up as well. And controlling for that light experience. Why? Because the retina, which is the light sensitive region at the back of our eyes, respond to light. It directly connects via the optic nerve to the visual cortex at the back of the brain. And as soon as light hits the retina, it alters the secretion of melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone responsible for putting you and I to sleep, right? So we want that melatonin level to be as high as possible. Now, our circadian rhythms, which is our body's natural evolution to light and dark based on the sun moving around, has evolved a mechanism that we respond to light, and therefore melatonin secretion goes up or goes down depending upon the ambient light levels. So now, in a world where we are immersed in light right until the second we go to bed, especially the blue light, which is being secreted off so many screens, it leads to a situation where melatonin levels is suppressed. And therefore, that normal physiological mechanism for us to fall asleep and stay asleep is being mitigated, right? So I often tell people simple things like having a separate light with a lower wattage, say 50% of what your normal wattage would be, and putting that on at about 8 to 9 p.m. Or having a dimmer switch, right? Very common in Western countries, where you can dim the light levels down. And starting at about 7:30, 8 p.m., such that ambient light level comes down, allows for a artificial replication of the outside world, and therefore the melatonin levels to be as optimal as possible, right? So that's the second thing, light. We can do the same with sound, right? We're sitting in this incredible room, which is soundproof. And there's a lot that we can do to ensure that our bedrooms are a quiet environment as well. Double glazed windows, heavier set curtains, carpet and rugs, even the quality of mattresses, pillows, etc., can really optimize to ensure that the bedroom is quiet. So like that, there are literally hundreds. I could go on for hours, but many, many biohacks around the bedroom environment and what to do before and during the night. Another really powerful biohack is magnesium, right? People will often hear me speak about micronutrients. And let me add this very important disclaimer. Micronutrients have an important role to play in our lives. Why? It's not that I'm saying that we should all be on it, but we should appreciate, and I think you probably are even more an expert than I am, the quality of soil over the last 4 or 5 decades has reached the stage where there's pretty much no nutrient coming in, right? And if your soil is not optimized, it's not getting to the plant, not getting to the food chain, and therefore not entering us, right? So in that regard, our body's need for micronutrients hasn't disappeared.
Sure.
So we need to get it from somewhere, right? Secondly, our palates have become increasingly restrictive. If you look at what we eat versus our ancestors, the amount or the variety of food has reduced significantly. A typical person will eat the same 8 or 9 dishes on a weekly basis. Whereas if you look back through history, anthropologically, we had seasonal variances in grain, in seed, in nuts, in root, in animal availability, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another really important facet. And the third is that a lot of our food is now has additives to there, whether it's chemicals, pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, etc., which all have an impact to play on our body. So micronutrient at the right dosage for the right person, for the right objective is really important. And one of the biggest and most important ones for us is magnesium. If there was one micronutrient that I would prescribe everyone, which I do actually, is magnesium. 400 milligrams of magnesium at 8 p.m., it's about 2 hours before you want to get to bed, is the optimal time to have magnesium. Magnesium is great for immunity, but it's also really, really good for optimizing recovery as well.
Does it have any side effects though?
No, actually, magnesium is a very, very safe and well-tolerated micronutrient. In fact, there's some interplay that it has with calcium, but otherwise your body, if you're in a healthy state, will just excrete out any excess that you have. So that's another, particularly people who are looking at sleep and recovery, magnesium is a really, really powerful micronutrient to have. So these are just some of the biohacks that a person can start to do when it comes to optimizing their sleep and recovery. Yeah.
So all those taking those Restils now hopefully don't need to.
I hope not. Melatonin has. So I sometimes use melatonin for transatlantic flights, particularly if I'm going to the US for 3 or 4 days. Then it has a role to play there. But melatonin has a time and place, but it should never be taken for long and extended periods of time because your body becomes used to exogenous and therefore starts to secrete less internally. Melatonin is very useful from an immunity perspective, right? And we saw this in COVID where in addition to vitamin D prescriptions, a lot of endocrinologists and integrative health experts were also prescribing melatonin to people, particularly post-COVID in that long COVID syndromic period. And it had a role to play from that perspective, but not for just regular use for sleep. Yeah.
Sure. So, you also mentioned about when you wake up, and I've heard people talk about how you shouldn't look at your phone first thing when you wake up and things. So, and I'm guessing it's partly like because you don't want to induce stress for all the things.
Indeed, yeah.
But also, maybe your eyes and just, having a bit more of a relaxed state of mind before you kind of, deal with the rest of the day, right? So I'm guessing that's sort of also one of the things that you would advocate.
Absolutely. If you visit our home, you'll see in our bedroom, it's a completely screen-free, let alone device-free, screen-free environment, right? Our clock is an old-fashioned analog clock. We have old-fashioned alarm clocks. We don't charge anything to plug to power up overnight. There's no TV screens. We don't even have a Kindle in our bedroom. And it's an important message for our children as well, right? To educate them because they've got such young minds that they just suck up everything that their parents are doing around them. So make sure your bedrooms are completely device-free. And the simple adage is, in the same way you want your body to enter the bedroom to recharge itself, have your phone charge in another room so that it can charge itself, right? So that instinctively it's not the first thing you reach out to, not only in the morning, but through the night as well, right? So you don't have that. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's talk about the second aspect, which I guess is a little
Fuel. Yeah.
closer to home.
Yeah.
Of course, consuming, sort of finding a healthy balance in what you have is really important. But what I want to sort of, and that's kind of an occupational hazard for me, is not necessarily eating all the right things at the right time, just nature of work, and also just sheer bad habit, I guess, on my part. But one thing I try and do to offset that is intermittent fasting. And I've heard sort of extreme views on this, and but it's what works for me, because I can't necessarily control what I have during the time that I'm eating, just tastings and whatnot, that I find this the most effective for me, because I'm able to stop eating, and I do it on and off depending on sort of when I'm traveling or at home and things, and I find that the most effective. But I have heard sort of opposing views on this, and to be honest, growing up, I'd never seen anyone around me do it, in family or friends, etc. It's something that I think has really come to the fore in sort of more recent years, and it could be that we were practicing it to some extent inadvertently. Maybe ancestors were, just because by eating early and before sleeping, and if you do it like that, eat early dinner and a slightly later breakfast. But what are your views on this?
So I find it fascinating that anthropologically, intermittent fasting has been a tool which has been with us since the beginning of our species. In fact, we as a primate species were able to leave Africa and survive in Europe because our bodies developed a capacity to convert fructose, which is nature's sugar in fruit, into a form of fat which could be stored, which allowed our ancestors to survive those harsh cold winters. If we didn't have that capacity, we wouldn't have been able to venture beyond sort of Africa and therefore penetrate to other parts of the world. You look at any religion or spiritual practice. So my wife comes from a Jain family. They have Padushan coming up at the end of the month. We've got Muharram today, right? So Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, all of these spiritual practices and religions have a form of fasting which has been woven into its dogma, right? So there was clearly some intelligence or idea behind this is an important practice and it leads to a benefit. Now, I think we're reaching that stage in science or biology today where we're able to investigate the whys, but clearly, the hows, etc. but clearly the whys have existed for a long period of time. The most recent evidence around IF, intermittent fasting, which was recently published about 2 months ago, has suggested that it's not just the eating window per se, but it's also the restriction in calories, which is leading to the benefit to the individual, right? So when we talk about intermittent fasting, a more appropriate terminology would be time-restricted eating within certain windows of time, right? And in some instances, people may decrease the amount of time, i.e. they only eat for 4 to 6 hours, but they will still be consuming the same amount of calories as they would if they were eating all the time, right? And most recent studies seems to suggest that doesn't confer at least a longevity benefit to the individual, that the longevity benefit occurs when there is a time-restricted window and there is a slight reduction in calorie consumption as well. However, as with everything in science, there's always the other side. When it comes to a pure metabolic perspective, just looking at your metabolism, whether you're wearing a glucose patch or studying your glucose levels, and we're living in a world where metabolic syndrome is an exploding phenomena, then allowing the body rest. And when I say rest, I don't mean the long rest that are there in these practices, but even that 6, 8, 12, 14-hour windows allows for the fuel which is being consumed to be migrated to the right compartment through the work of insulin and the other metabolic purposes in order for us to achieve a state of health. So I use IF, or rather time-restricted eating, very effectively, particularly post-COVID. When I was a frontline medic during the first wave, I was being deputed to GWAT South, so I was working with the BMC in the slums. And this is right when COVID really took hold. And these are days before we even had testing, where all of it was based on clinical history taking and examining patients. Unfortunately, in that first wave, I fell ill with COVID. And it was days when we didn't have much in terms of an armory to treat it. And in addition to the pneumonia, I also developed this strange neurological phenomena, which meant that I was put on high-dose steroids for a period of time, which altered my metabolism and it made me pre-diabetic to, something that I'd never experienced previously, especially someone who's so fit and likes to stay healthy. And one of the best techniques that I found to correct that metabolism for myself was time-restricted eating. I lost a significant amount of weight through that, 11, 12 kilos. And I've now learned to how to use it in some people, right? It's not for everyone. I think people still have challenges when it comes to the migraine, which is really your body's withdrawal from carbohydrate. And some people have issues around hyperacidity. Both of those can be tolerated and I won't say medicated, but can be controlled, be managed. Yeah, thank you. So there is a place for time-restricted eating, but I think it depends on what is the goal with that individual. Are you looking to just lose weight, in which case there are probably more effective ways? Or is there a metabolic change that you need to make? Or is there a longevity benefit, which increasingly science is suggestive thereof? So I think, it's one of those areas where more science and more study will ultimately tell us how it works. As to why it works, well, history is as old as time. Yeah.
So speaking of fasting, I saw that you did a 72-hour water-only fast. That sounds near impossible for someone like me. It's almost like the Vipassana of food. What was that all about?
So as my wife Ranney and I discovered the benefits of time-restricted eating, we naturally wanted to see how far we could push. And being a geek at heart, I'm constantly measuring things on myself and her. I subject her to all kinds of things, some of which she enjoys, many of which she doesn't enjoy. And this fasting window extension was one of the things which we became more and more curious about, because when you extend the fast window, the first benefit is the metabolic gain, right? In terms of body's resistance or sensitivity rather to insulin, and therefore how to manage glucose. But as you take that out further and further, the science is suggestive that first you enter a phase of autophagy, which is self-cleanse, auto-self-phagy eat. So there's a recycling that happens inside of your cells so that old gunky proteins and structures are broken down and recycled to create new cells, which is great. And then if you take that further and further out, there seems to be some benefit to stem cell, rejuvenation, immune system, etc. So we reached a very comfortable stage about a year in after first COVID, wherein once a week, 24 hours became a breeze, right? Every Monday, typically, we'd be on a complete water-only fast. And then 2-3 times a week, we'd add in a larger 14, 16-hour window. And as I said, right, my Raina, she comes from a Jain family. So
what do you mean? So you would do a 24-hour and then you would also do it for like the restricted eating.
Exactly. Yeah. So every Monday would be pure water, and then maybe twice a week extra would be.
I would just sleep the whole day. So that's the way to get around it.
Actually, it's better if you don't sleep, right? What we found is the more active you are in terms of mentally, so we pack ourselves with work.
You wouldn't even realize.
You wouldn't realize.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that, and actually the flip side of that is that sometimes you end up missing lunch, or before you realize it, it's like 4 o'clock and you haven't eaten lunch. But I'm always told that's a bad thing and that you should kind of pace your meals out. But sorry, go ahead.
No, so that's how we started. And then, I proposed the idea to her that given that we have this family tradition of extended fasts, that should we contemplate doing 72 hours? And we've reached the stage now. So we tried it first time. It was really tough. First time, particularly night 2, I don't know what went on. I think it was a ketogenic response. I remember closing my eyes and I had these bright lights shining behind it. It was my brain sending a message to my body saying,
I need
get up and go to the fridge. Just what are you doing? Why are you trying to do this? But anyway, we got through night 2 and then it became easier day 3. And now we do it once a quarter. Once a quarter, we do a 72-hour fast. This year, and I'm not going to overcommit. Well, I will. Actually, I'll commit it. We're going to try doing 96. We're going to go for 4 days at the end of the month and see how we fare on that front as well. And
all I'm thinking right now is like those politicians who do this on as a strike, and that's kind of what came to mind. But sorry, I don't know why I just said that. But yeah, we'll be safe while doing all of this. I'm guessing, your body's kind of adapted to this. So it's not a complete shock.
Exactly. And what I always find fascinating, because we'll wear a glucose patch while doing it. We're doing a ton of blood tests before, during, and after. And that sort of satiates the extreme nature, is just looking at the data and seeing what's going on behind the scenes. What I found most fascinating the last time we did it, because I measured our fasting insulin. My fasting insulin went from a normal level of about 9 to 10 to less than 1, which effectively meant that I gave my body almost like type 1 diabetes, because there was just no insulin in the bloodstream. And then for the next
But
few
isn't
days,
that quite dangerous?
it is not in a short term, because
Right.
by day 3, the insulin levels was back on. But what I was able to do was then we intervened and did different types of exercise, different types of fuel, i.e. different foods, etc., to see when you're in the purest form where there's practically no insulin, how does my body respond to that, right? So again, just to satiate that crazy biology monkey mind of mine. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm a long way from this. I think this is a good point to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to This Round is on Me. Let's move on and talk about the third pillar. Did you say movement?
Movement and
I was
exercise.
listening.
Yeah. And I think the key thing for everyone out there, and again, this is something I could talk for many, many hours on, is we should all make sure we're getting regular movement through the day. If people are familiar with the Blue Zone study, which was a study commissioned by National Geographic, I think about 15 or 20 years ago, led by Dan Boitner, where they identified 5 societies around the world: Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, La Jolla in Florida, somewhere in Costa Rica, and a 5th place, which I always forget. These are places where they had supercentenarians, so people who lived on average greater than 110 years old, right? Superb small communities, but a massive longevity gain,
Wow.
right? And the idea was nature versus nurture, right? If we control for their genomes, which we can study, what is going on in the environment which might be conducive to this existence, and they found that there were 9 common traits. And anyone interested can have a look at the Blue Zones. This is what it's called. And one of the traits which they found across all of them was this idea of regular movement through the day. Not exercise, not high intensity, going to the gym for 30, 60 minutes in the morning, but just making sure that through the day, you were just constantly moving around. Either you were walking up and down to the market, or going up and down hills, or spending time on the farm, or managing the kids, or there was just something to get you up and about.
Is this what our daily step count is all about?
This is
maybe?
where, exactly. So the 10,000 number came from a marketing guru who conceptualized this idea.
So tell me the real number, because that's what I care about.
I personally feel that number is closer to 8,000,
Wow.
right? I personally feel it's closer to 8,000, and the 8,000 should be distributed as follows. 6,000 of that, particularly if you're wanting to lose weight or manage your visceral fat, which is the amount of fat in your organs, about 6,000, so about 1 hour of the day should come from
Intense.
not intense, just at a stretch.
Right. As in,
Hence,
yeah.
the morning walk on a
Focused,
on
walking,
a fasted state is a great mechanism. And the other 2,000-3,000 should come distributed through the day, so that you're constantly moving throughout the day to get that benefit. There was an interesting study, I forget the citation, but I think it was done by the National Institute of Public Health in Copenhagen, where they studied individuals who would exercise for 30 to 40 minutes in the morning, which is the WHO recommendation, but then sat for greater than 6 hours a day. And all of that exercise benefit was negated by then sitting for 6-7 hours, right? So that's a fallacy that we think, oh, we'll hit the gym or we go for a run in the morning and then
You're
I'll
done.
sit back. Yeah, it's the opposite. You should gradually be gently moving throughout the day to get the maximum form. So that's number one. The second thing that I encourage people, and I'll just leave people with 3 on this, but the second thing is the high intensity exercise, right? So there's aerobic activity, which is what we were just describing. And there's anaerobic, which is where you're forcing the body to create and consume a fuel in a very short period of time, but at a high intensity, right? Think of Michael Phelps swimming the 50 meters, or think of Usain Bolt running the 100 meters, right? It's a very different fuel source versus Eliud Kipchoge, who's running a full marathon in a sub-2. And that fuel source is really important to keep cycling in the body. The mitochondria, the energy production cells, or organelles rather, inside of the cells, need to get used to burning that at a high intensity sometimes. So if you are doing aerobic exercise, great, but also make sure that in the week, once or twice, you are burning this lactic acid producing high intensity form of energy. Really important. And the last, which is critical to longevity, is resistance training. The average human being loses somewhere in the region of 2 to 3% of muscle after their 4th decade of life forever. So we need to ensure that we have the right bulk around our bones, because if you fall and fracture your hip at the age of 70, you've got a greater than 50% probability of being dead within the next 12 months, right? That's how dangerous these fractures are as we get older. And there's very few ways of gaining muscle as you grow old, because your hormones reduce. So any male that I see over the age of 40, I make sure they do a testosterone test in their metabolic panel, right? and we optimize for testosterone, because in males, testosterone is the hormone required for
Right.
generating more mass and muscle. Same with female. One would want to do a complete endocrine study of estrogen, LH, FH, all of these things, right? So make sure twice a week you're spending 30 minutes in the gym doing resistance forms of exercise, because in the long run, it is this form which will keep you healthy and alive for as long as possible. Yeah.
Very interesting. And, you're absolutely right that, everyone jokes about that time you turn 40. And, I was like, what? There's no difference. I'm fine. And then sure enough, a few months later, and since then, basically, I've definitely felt my metabolism sort of slow down. And the same, the things that I would do and lose weight so quickly, take twice as long. And so this is very interesting to know. And you hear so many sort of conflicting things, like people say you shouldn't do weights and it's not, you should use your natural sort of resistance to build muscle and things like that. But I think the main point is to understand why it's so important to build muscle mass. And that's really interesting for me. The fourth one, which is
the environment. Absolutely. Yes. So it's, as I said, right, we are not organisms in isolation. We exist as a spectrum connected with everyone and everything around us, whether it's technology, as we've spoken about with sleep, whether it's the quality of air, the quality of water, the quality of light, etc., that we expose ourselves to. So one can appreciate why having a comfortable, nice surrounding is really important for us, whether we want to thrive at work or at home or at play. But I think if you take that further, then it's also the quality of relationships. And again, going back to the Blue Zone study, when they looked at particularly the Okinawans in Japan, they found this concept of the moai, rather, which is 5 people that formed this tribe around the individual. And we often hear this, right? You are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, etc. And all of us have got people who are energy drainers, or people who invest energy and you feel just more energetic after that. So I think it's really important that we all take an account of not only where we spend time, but with whom we spend time, and how that needs to change, evolve, and adapt to the situations that we're in. And that's where this ideology of, therefore, biohacking the environment, the physical environment, whether we spoke about light and sound and temperature when it comes to sleep, but also taking cues and thinking about the nature of your personal relationships, gratitude, empathy, joy, compassion. All of these things are hugely important, because we are human beings. We're not just cells, but we have a being comprised within that. Yeah.
How do you think, just to pause and sort of apply this in a context that I find myself in our situation, which is being a team leader at work, right?
Yeah.
So how do you feel, and you're surrounded, we have 200 employees or team members rather, and we're not all, I'm not around 200 people all the time, but, work is such where there are situations that, as they say, make your blood boil and whatnot. And we're in a very people-driven business, just in terms of hospitality and being around, guests, diners, etc. How, of course, the people that you choose to be around is one thing, but how do you kind of handle the stresses that life throw at you on a day-to-day basis? Or are there any sort of tools that you can use to manage this better?
Yeah. So each of us, our stress response is driven by the sympathetic arm of our nervous system, which is fight or flight, critical to our survival. If we didn't have it, we would never have escaped the saber-toothed tiger. We would never have climbed the tree for the sweeter mango. We'd never have got that mate, which we were fighting against that other alpha male in our group for. The yin-yang balance in our body is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is sort of to rest and digest, right? The system. And the main nerve in that mechanism is the vagus nerve. It's cranial nerve 10. It innervates the heart, the lungs, the gut, practically every major system. And what's really interesting about the vagal nerve is that it's overridden through breathing exercises, right?
This is where meditation,
which is where meditation comes in. So there's a fantastic technique which I use very often on myself as well, called box breathing, which is this idea of breathing in a box. So everyone listening can do this with me, is with us both now, where you sit with a straight back, right? Preferably eyes closed, but not necessarily. Hands are placed on your lap. And we're going to breathe in for 4 counts. We're going to hold for 4 counts. We're going to breathe out for 4 counts and repeat it, right? That's why it's called box. So everyone listening can breathe in, but breathe in through the nose. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now hold your breath. 4, 3, 2, 1, and breathe out through your mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold your breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll do one more cycle. Breathe in from your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 4, 3, 2, 1. And breathe out gently from your mouth. 4, 3, 2, 1. So when you do this box 4 times, it takes you 16 times 4, right? 64 seconds. So just over a minute. You can do it literally anywhere. But what's really interesting about this technique is you're physically overriding the stress response through the parasympathetic nerve activation. If I was measuring your heart rate right now, I would immediately see a 6 to 8 beats per minute reduction. Your systolic blood pressure would have fallen by about 10 points of mercury. Your heart rate variability, which is the time between successive beats, which is basically how stressed you are, would have increased, which is a good thing, etc. So this technique of box breathing is a fantastic, quick biohack that anyone can do, particularly if you're just in that stress response. And we as human beings have this awful thing of reacting rather than responding. And I just find that by box breathing for that 1 minute creates that space that allows me to center myself before if I need to charge out again, that's fine. But at least I'm doing so willingly and not through subconscious control. Yeah.
Very interesting. Definitely going to try that. There are plenty of opportunities for me to do this at work. The last one.
Emotions. Yeah. It's a subject I've been fascinating about. I mean, even in the book I wrote, I dedicated the last chapter to mind over matter, because even if you, or any athlete, and I got to study and talk to some incredible endurance people who summited Everest, who've run full marathons, who've achieved XYZ. It is that brain's ability to override the body at the right time, which is the difference between success and failure. Right? And the more we can learn to train our brain for that mindset, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a chef, whether you're a technologist, whether you're a parent, the more you can train your brain to understand how to leverage its power over the body, which is, as I said, is a subconscious operating system, which is nature has given to us, the higher the likelihood of success. And this, I believe, is where this mood and emotion particularly has such a big role to play in our day-to-day lives. Yeah.
And I mean, is this again something that you sort of help people through?
Yeah.
You intend to?
Yeah. Irrespective of whether you're training for endurance, whether you're training for high intensity performance, and that could be a work environment as well. Quite a lot of the work we do at Human Edge is with CEOs, with corporate leaders. We call them corporate athletes. The difference between a sports athlete is that she or he has the advantage of only having to perform for a limited period of time in a very specific arena, right? And they have this incredible team around them that will take care of their nutrition and this and that and optimize them, etc. Stuff that I used to do and we do in the other sphere. But for a corporate athlete, their job is much harder. She has to perform 6 days a week, 7 days a week, 14, 16, 18 hours a day, then go home or be in that home environment and manage all the other stuff around us as well. And so this ability to manage that process is really, really important. So I think these are all, and that's where this idea of biohacking comes in, right? Small things that we can each do, whether it's the box breathing, whether it's optimizing sleep so that even if you are only able to sleep for 5 hours a night, you're doing it in a temperature controlled, light restricted, quiet environment. So when you are asleep, your body is getting the maximum benefit from that restorative process. So looking at all these tiny things, because truthfully, they compound up. So like investing, right? You have the SIP approach, small, tiny investments over a lifetime, which lead to long-term gain. And the same way we do it for wealth creation, we should do it for health creation as well. Yeah.
So I know a lot of us do this, or become more mindful of all this when we've either, hit rock bottom or like the most sort of stressful peak of our lives, etc.
Yeah.
You're a dad to 2 kids and I'm a mom to 1. How do we kind of inculcate, this to at a younger age so that it just becomes a way of life and it's not something that you have to, force yourself to adapt to a lot later on?
I think in terms of role modeling, it's lead by example, right? Whether it's the time my wife and I spend outdoors, and we're very open and vocal and we post a lot about this as well. Yeah. We love spending time in nature, and we've been very fortunate that our kids, Aiden, who's now 6, and Eva, who will be 4, also have adapted or rather been attracted to this idea of being like outdoor bunnies to some degree, right? Getting dirty in the mud and climbing things, etc. Fuel, simple things around the home, right? Making changes, white rice to red rice, whole grain or simple grains to whole grains or bajras and ragis and jawars, etc. Switching from normal dairy products to almond milk that we'll make at home. So tiny little things, but at the young age can influence them. And I think for all of us as parents, right, it's not to make clones of ourselves, but it's just to open their eyes and hopefully set them on a path that they will make the right choices in life, because their lives belong to tomorrow where we'll never go, as Rumi says. So we just want to equip them with the right mindset that they can then choose wisely for their lifetime. Yeah.
Absolutely. Going back to this point about you can't treat what you can't measure.
Yeah.
I see you're wearing a ring. I don't know. I mean, it's what are these rings called?
This is the Aura ring.
Aura ring. Yeah. And, you have these glucose patches that have, really flooded the market now. For someone like me, and honestly, I've been bombarded with a lot of these, ads for this, and I'm like, I'm on this path to being healthier and looking after my well-being and being more mindful, so should I invest in one of these? And then when I start reading about it, honestly, at some point I sort of drop off in a way, because I can't understand how measuring or getting this data, how that sort of converts into something beneficial for me. So yes, you get all this data. I mean, yes, with steps, you're probably burning X number of calories, or you're like, it's the thing to do, so you do it.
Yeah.
But say with the glucose patch, where you're able to see how your glucose spikes after certain things you've eaten, and you probably know a lot of these things are going to spike your glucose. If you have a big fat chocolate donut, you know that it's probably going to have that effect, right? So then what?
Yeah.
I think that's the sort of missing link for someone like me. And is it something that now we're constantly sort of using, whatever machines or tech rather to, and we're constantly monitoring everything we're doing, and it's just sort of, you're losing just enjoying life, as I think of it in a very simplistic way.
Yeah.
I think that's where sometimes I, hold back from devices, if that's the right word, like these. So what's your take on this? I mean, I know that health tech is the future, but how do you kind of convince someone like me who may be a little resistant to adopting all of this into my, day-to-day life?
Well, I definitely won't wear the patch when I'm at Mag Street Cafe at the bakery on a Sunday morning, for sure. But no, I think there's some interesting shifts that are happening. One is, if you look at the current devices, it's a little like the seven blind men, feeling the elephant, right? Each of them has a very unidimensional point of view around a very complicated, holistic organism, which, if interpreted in silo, can quite often lead to erroneous, in some cases, dangerous situations, right? So that's where we are today. Where will we be in 10 years' time? I think we will undeniably be in a world where the interpretation is happening at a level of intelligence that we don't need to be concerned about. And rather, the interventions are then being suggested to us to either make them or automated in our day-to-day lives. And I described this in that TED Talk where I spoke about our CPUs, culinary planning units, being pre-programmed by that health concierge, that data cloud, to prescribe what we can eat, how much we can eat, and the taste will be there, of course. It'll all be curated by the table or Mag Street or something like this, right? So I think where we're going directionally is a very, very interesting world. And that's certainly the space that I increasingly want to be able to shape, because I believe there's a great advantage to our species if we can make these small lifestyle interventions. When people are empowered with information, the right information at the right time, it leads to that behavior change. And that can potentially become sustainable. In other instances, you might be sowing the seed of knowledge, which a few years later may play out, right? So the instance or the circumstance may change, but I think that if we can empower people, right, with good quality information which makes sense, then it can lead to some long-term benefits and gains. So whether it's the patch, whether it's the Oura Ring, whether it's the Fitbit device, etc., if you're wearing it to understand your body, that's great. I think, very quickly, probably in the next 24 to 36 months, we will be in this existence where those data streams are beginning to talk with each other. And using that intelligence, systems like ours or many others will be able to suggest to you, this is your option for what you should be doing. And then probably 7 to 8 years from there on, it may become automated or pre-programmed to some degree as well. So it's exciting, right? To have all of this.
No, I mean, it is very interesting. And
Yeah.
I guess at some point, the idea of too much information won't be a thing. So, we're moving in that direction, I think, in a wide range of industries. And, health tech is obviously a big part of that.
How do you manage your day-to-day lives? Because, my grandfather was a restaurateur in England. And I have very, very young memories of seeing the kitchen environment, how stressful it was. And for you to manage so many successful brands at the same time and have a child and have, an active personal life, et cetera, et cetera. How do you biohack your day?
So honestly, I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
But a lot of the things that you were saying are things that I've been trying to incorporate into my life without sort of maybe thinking about it in this sort of more structured way. But of course, sleep, and that's very easy for me. I'm usually out like an old auntie by 10 o'clock. So that's one thing. I love my sleep, and it's something I sort of treasure. I probably sleep a lot more than I should, in fact. So that's one thing. But I think it's not just about sleep, it's also quality of sleep, right? And then you don't wake up in the night and things like that. Intermittent fasting, that's something I'm sort of trying every so often to do. But again, the nature of my work is such that I have to break it sometimes. But I find that the sort of easiest way to kind of balance what I eat the rest of the time when I do eat. But again, it was interesting that you said that, it's not just that you can eat whatever you want during that 8-hour window or whatever eating time there is, but it's also, again, the number of calories and things.
The number and nature of calories,
right.
Both.
Yeah. And I think just, from the time we started this business 12 years ago to today, I know that a lot of how I react or respond, as you said, and sometimes respond to situations that seem stressful has changed. The things that would trigger me 10 years ago has definitely changed today, and the other things that trigger me now. But it's something that I'm trying to be more aware of so that I don't have that, because I'll be honest, I mean, and it's probably not unique to the F&B industry. I'm sure it's in a lot of businesses that are consumer facing, but there's plenty of stressful situations thrown at you every single day. And I think that that's why I was very interested to understand that as a sort of leader and a mentor and example to everyone around me, it's really important as to how I sort of behave, right, in all these situations. So I think I'm trying to kind of be more reflective and pause before reacting. And also, you realize with sort of experience that it's not the end of the world every 5 minutes. So hopefully all of this, and I'm definitely, you've given me a lot of food for thought, pardon the pun, but you have, and I hope to incorporate some of this into my life. But speaking of being an entrepreneur, I mean, you've gone from medical student to doctor, full-time doctor, to, author, now entrepreneur. So how's that been for you? How's that transition been for you?
Serendipitous, exciting, scary. It's my North Star is biology. I just love biology. I love the human body. I love the ideology of getting the most out of this life that we've been so fortunate to have been given. Whether it was working with fighter pilots in the Air Force or with astronauts at NASA, this ability that this body is just anti-fragile. You can push it to the limits. It doesn't break. It becomes a stronger version. And then how do we apply that to our day-to-day lives, right? Not just from a disease care perspective, but truly from a health span perspective, and allowing that information to be democratized and every human being to have access to that information. That's the journey that excites me. We're living in this amazing age of biology and technology, and these two worlds just coming together closer and closer. For all of the pitfalls and suffering that we've gone through because of the pandemic, I think the biggest advantage we've had is this grand realization of the importance of health and well-being, whether it's us individually, whether it's within our teams, organizations, or whether it's within our nation states, right? Every entity has discovered how important this is. And so I just find myself at that interesting point where I am passionate, I can create change, I have an influence to create change, And there's a degree of intelligence or information that I have that could be made available to other people. And that just keeps me going. So I'm excited. I don't know where this whole journey goes on, but I'll just keep on chugging along.
So is your app available for people to download? Or?
Not yet. It will be. So the business is called Human Edge. You can visit the site, humanedge.co. From January, the app will be available on the Play Store, Apple, and Android. But up until then, I'm more than happy to connect with people and share my biohacks with them online.
Well, and for those of you who can see this, Marcus has also written at the Human Edge, which is, I started reading it and, even though I'm not in the least bit a science student, but it's hugely informative and interesting, perspective on our bodies. So, I definitely recommend that. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back for the fun last segment of the show.
Okay, all right.
So welcome back. And Marcus, this is what we call our rapid fire round, where it's all fun, no work, so all play. And, these are just random questions. So just fire away the first thing that comes to your mind.
All right. I haven't cheated. I don't know what you're asking.
What's your go-to comfort food?
An oats chiller with eggs.
Oh my God, you're way too healthy for me.
I love it. We make it at home and there's a incredible coconut chutney and tomato chutney type of salsa on there. Yeah, it's incredible. I discovered it during COVID, just started experimenting in the kitchen and then now it's just my go-to.
Staple.
Yeah.
Nice. A great book you've read in the recent past or a podcast you've heard, whatever.
So I'm a massive fan of Peter Attia's work. Anyone who's interested in this subject, who's been listening to us and interested in knowing more about longevity, Peter's podcast called The Drive is a great resource on performance and longevity. So I just love listening to that every week. Yeah.
Interesting. What's the best investment you've made in your journey so far?
In my health, without a doubt. At an early age, discovering that it's important to look after this machine. And yeah.
Great. Who've been your role models or mentors along the way?
So mentors, I keep having new mentors that come for different phases of life, right? And I think that's important for all of us. And equally, I've always tried to be a mentor to someone as well as being mentored by someone because you learn a lot in that mentoring process. Cliched as it is, I have learned so much from Rhino. Just the wisdom, the strength of being a mom and a working professional. It's just been incredible. And yeah, I'm very fortunate.
Do you guys work together or?
We don't. We set up this medicine collection drive, which you may have heard of, Meds for More, which became this citizen
That was
level.
amazing. I remember during COVID and you were asking people basically to give
unused and unexpired medicines. It's still going. We've collected over 1.5 tons of medicines. We've helped over 100,000 patients across the country. 12 cities it went live and it continues to make impact and all without...
So how do people get medicine?
Visit the website,
okay.
www.medsformore.org or on Instagram. It's very simple. You can just send your meds in and then the NGOs collect them, distribute them, check them, etc. And we did all of this without raising a single rupee of financial contribution. So we're very grateful to have been there to do this. Yeah.
Great. What's your definition of success?
Getting time to spend playing with my kids at home. So I've been working from home now for 6-7 years. And I think it's incredible that in between, now they go to school, which is we hated it when there was no school, but now I miss them dearly because they get shipped off.
I was very happy. I didn't know who was happy on our first day of school.
First day. Now it's lonely. I don't know what to do at home for so many hours. But having the opportunity to have a nap with my little girl in the middle of the afternoon, that's success. Why else are we doing everything we do?
I agree.
Yeah.
And finally, your message to startup entrepreneurs.
It's a tough journey. I won't pretend to be an expert because I'm just starting my journey. So I'm just excited by seeing where it takes me. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, listen, I wish you all the very best, not just on your entrepreneurial journey, but also on your Ironman that's coming up.
Ironman.
Dude, anything, like even 10% is better than anything I'm capable of doing. So
thank you.
Really good luck and break a leg, as they say. But thank you for making the time to be on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Gauri, for having me. Thank you.
I hope you found that to be a well-spent hour and you leave the show with small changes that will improve your performance, longevity, and of course, your overall health and well-being. I know I certainly will be more mindful of my lifestyle choices, and especially with using the box breathing technique. I'd love to hear from you with any feedback, so drop me a DM on Instagram where you can find me at Gauri Devidyal, and have a great week ahead. I hope you enjoyed tuning in today. Do catch the earlier episodes when you get a chance, and more importantly, I would love to hear from you with your thoughts on the show. You can find me on Instagram at Gauri Devidyal, or on Twitter at Gauri Details or LinkedIn. Either way, sit back and relax, because this round is on me.